And this tape is in response to your request that I give you some resume as to my call from God to preach. I was saved when I was 14 years old in Salem, New Jersey. I was saved in a rather unusual way, in that there was no personal work involved on the part of a soul winner who searched me out to win to Christ. For me, it was an internal desire to go to church, and having done so, I realized for the first time in my life that I could enjoy going to church. I became interested in going to a cottage prayer meeting. I never heard the word cottage prayer meeting before and didn't know what it was, but I attended anyway. I was startled to realize that when the people got down on their knees to pray, they began to pray one after the other, and they were heading in my direction. While I waited the approaching doom, I began to rehearse a prayer because I had never prayed in public before in my life. By the time I was reached and expected to pray, I began to say something about the shepherd and the sheep. But before I got too many words out in prayer, I began to weep. And I cried rather uncontrollably. And while I was crying, I wondered, what's the matter with me? Why am I crying? After a while, I was able to say amen and finish my feeble attempt to pray, but successfully cry. And the next fellow went on and prayed. I went back to church the next Sunday with enthusiasm, an enthusiasm that even surprised me because I never had such desire to go to church before in my life. It was announced then that another cottage prayer meeting would be conducted. Well, I made up my mind I wasn't going to be embarrassed at this one, and I determined to go to it, and determined just as much to rehearse a prayer so that I would be ready. I rehearsed that prayer from Sunday to Wednesday. When we got to the place to pray, I was not fooled this time when everybody got on their knees and someone started to pray. When it came my turn, I started out with my rehearsed prayer. But as I had previously done the week before I uttered just a few words, I was crying again, and I couldn't understand why. Finally, the prayer time was over, and we all stood up, and I was wiping my tears away. And I said to the people there, isn't there a song that says something about Jesus being your friend? And the wife of a preacher, an old woman, said, do you mean what a friend we have in Jesus? And I said, yeah, I guess that's what I mean. How does it go? So she started singing it, and the others joined in. And I said, I recognized, and I said, yeah, that's the one. And I started crying all over again. Well, the next Saturday, I went back to the house where this cottage prayer meeting had been conducted. And I went down into the basement where the man was who lived there. And he was my uncle. His wife was my mother's sister. And I said to him, Uncle Ed, I don't understand it, but things seem to be different with me since last Wednesday night when we were here at the cottage prayer meeting. And I said, I feel better. I don't understand that. He said, well, you must have gotten saved. And I said, saved? What do you mean saved? He said, well, that's when Jesus comes into your heart. And I said to him, do you really think he did? And he said, well, it sounds like it to me. Well, that's how I got saved. He encouraged me to give a public testimony. I didn't even know what the word testimony meant, but I went the next Sunday to the young people's meeting at the Methodist Church where I was a member but not saved until then. And I gave a testimony in public for the first time. Well, I was 14. As I progressed on through high school, and at the age of 17, I graduated. I had an ambition to join the Marines and get involved in World War II, which was going on at that time. I wanted to defend the honor of our country and fight against the Japs especially. I had unconsciously slipped away from the Lord because I had an attraction for a sweet Christian girl, but she became my very and every thought, and it had affected me spiritually without me really fully appreciating it. And I'd reached kind of a crisis in my life just after I had graduated from high school in 1945. And it was at that crisis when I really came to grips with my life, and especially when one Sunday in church they sang "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross," and the phrase, "All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood." And I realized that that girl was a vain thing. And it was that vain thing that I had to sacrifice to the blood of Christ, which I did right then and there on the spot, and received a great deal of peace, and seemed like the restoration of my fellowship with the Lord was complete at that moment. That afternoon we went to a jail service, and I felt so good I gave an enthusiastic testimony. And after the jail service, one of the women who was there said to me, "Paul, you ought to be a preacher." And for the first time in my life, it struck me, maybe I should be. I worked for the post office. The next day, Monday morning, on my way to work, all I could think of was go to college and prepare for the ministry, go to college and prepare for the work of the Lord. And that thought just dominated me all that day. And I began to think about it constantly and pray over it. And finally, through some other events, I was working in the post office one day and saw on the backside of a magazine an advertisement for Bob Jones College in Cleveland, Tennessee. I had never heard of the place, didn't even know it existed. I thought it was a rather goofy name for a college. But there were two things on that ad that struck me, and it was, we believe in the absolute authority of the Bible, and we stand without apology for the old-time religion. Boy, that struck home to me, and I said that's the place for me. And it seemed as though God directed. So I sent off and got my applications and wound up there and was trained and graduated from Bob Jones University. But there is an incident in my life that I recalled and think back on, and I think it's worthy to be mentioned. I didn't like going to Sunday school. That kind of figured into when I was 14 years old. I had this strange and unusual desire to go to church. I couldn't wait till I was 16 years of age when I could quit going to Sunday school and start smoking cigarettes. I just didn't like going. My mother made me go, and I had to go every Sunday. But they used to have a children's meeting in that Methodist church there in Salem, New Jersey. And they had it on Thursday afternoon, as I recall, right after school. And it was called the Junior League, I believe. I was about, I guess maybe in the second grade, maybe the third grade. And the school I attended for those grades was right next door to this First Methodist Church where I attended. And several of the children that I knew as friends in the church and friends I had there in school went to this Junior League, and every once in a while they would ask me to go, and I thought, goodness, you must think I'm nuts. I can't stand going there on Sunday, let alone go throughout the week. I'm not going, and I resisted all of their appeals and their invitations. So this one time I was asked again. I thought, boy, this is the dumbest thing, to go to church during the week. And for some screwy reason, I consented and said yes. And I thought, what have I done? I don't want to go to church during the week. I don't even want to go on Sunday. But I went. And like I say, I was about maybe the second or third grade. And I went. And they had the little service. And by the way, it's the only time I ever went. I never went back to that Junior League. Never again did I attend it. And I went that one time. And there was a woman that I knew. She was a Sunday school teacher, and I was not really surprised when I saw her conducting this children's meeting. And her name was Mildred Bennett. And Mildred Bennett conducted the service, and I do not remember anything she said or anything about it, but I do remember at the conclusion of that service, I was up kneeling at the altar with all these other children. Now, how she got us up there and what we were supposed to come to the altar for, I don't know. I don't remember, but I remember we were there at that altar. So I was, 7 years old, maybe 8, and kneeling at that altar. And I don't even know why I was there. I can't recall the purpose. Guess maybe because the rest of my friends went up there. And it may have been on her part that she was calling us to give our hearts to Christ. I don't even remember that emphasis or that appeal. I just went. But I remember while I was kneeling there, I had a strange thought that bewildered me as a 7 or 8-year-old boy. And I did a strange thing. I took my finger and beckoned to Mildred Bennett. And she leaned over and said, "What is it, Paul?" And I said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Well, what is it?" I said, I want to whisper to you. So she leaned down, and I whispered in her ear, "Do you know what I'm going to be when I grow up?" And she said, "What?" I said, "I'm going to be a preacher." And if that wasn't the goofiest thing, because, like I said, I couldn't wait till I got 16 years of age to stand up to my mother and tell her how now I'm an adult. I'm never going to go to church again, Sunday school, and I could smoke cigarettes like my older brothers. So why in the world, and I detested Sunday school, why in the world I would make such a stupid statement to her or anybody else that I was going to be a preacher. I just don't know why I said it. And I've reflected back on that experience several times since I've grown up. And I don't know how to explain it, except that maybe then God knew more about me than I knew about myself. And it may be that God, as an unsaved young boy, was doing something in my heart and giving direction to my life. At least I think so. And I believe that maybe God called me before he saved me. Now that may sound weird, may sound strange, but I don't think so. Because I look back on my life even before I was saved at 14 and see other things that I detect now as having been the hand of God on me. Somebody said to me in recent years, how do you know that God has called you to preach? I said, because that's what I'm doing. I remember after I got saved, they asked me to give that testimony in that young people's meeting called the Epworth League on Sunday afternoon. Then the cottage prayer meeting that was being conducted was to pray for this forthcoming revival meeting. And I never heard the word revival before, didn't even know what it meant. But the evangelist came, and that was another word I didn't have any knowledge of, evangelist. I never had heard that word before, but this evangelist came and preached in that Methodist church, and he gave the invitation one night, and I went forward, not to be saved. I knew I was saved, but I went forward and knelt at the altar. I guess just because I wanted to go forward as a Christian, and maybe it was an appeal to give a public profession of faith, I don't know. But I went to the altar, and several of the men came and knelt around me and prayed with me. And nobody ever took the Bible and showed me how I could know I was saved. No Romans Road or no reference ever to the Bible. And yet I knew I was saved. And nobody ever showed me from the Bible I was a sinner. No one ever. It showed me how by faith you received Christ as the gift of eternal life, and nothing like that. Yet I knew I was saved. I knew in my heart that Jesus Christ had come in. Like my uncle said, he guessed that's what had happened. I said, well, do you think he did? He said, yeah. I said, well, that was good enough for me. So when I got up from that altar, I started down the aisle. I was walking there by myself. I looked up toward the ceiling of the church, but I was looking beyond the ceiling, and really in an attitude of prayer I said something, and I said it like this: Dear Jesus, anything you want to do is all right with me. I've thought back on that experience in my life. I didn't know, I hadn't heard anything about surrender of your life to Christ and giving yourself to the Lord and the will of God. But as a 14-year-old boy, without knowing too much and really ignorant about most of the things of God, I realize now that in my heart I was surrendering myself to the Lord. And in that statement, I was letting Jesus know that I belonged to him, and anything he wanted to do with me was all right. And I conclude my words by saying that that was 44 years ago. And today, as far as I'm concerned, anything Jesus wants to do is still all right with me. Thank you for this opportunity you give me to tell you of my call to preach.